A pleasure to be here. And I'm just going to start us off by talking about pricing as a strategy and how that fits into marketing your products and markets and things like that. So kind of the pricing 101 that we were asked to provide. So I always want to start by thinking about what is marketing, because we tend to think about marketing as kind of this advertising, right? So we think of marketing, people always think of advertising something, but marketing is actually the process of creating and delivering desired goods and services to customers, right? So it's everything from you producing your product, pricing your product, distributing your product, and promoting your product. So that is all of marketing. So it's all of those activities, including winning your customers, right, through promotion, and then retaining them as well. So what I'm trying to do today is kind of show you how pricing is part of this overall marketing that you have in terms of for your business. It's not just of pricing of one particular product, but it actually involves everything that you're doing in your business. So thinking about it in a holistic way. So some secrets to successful marketing: you want to understand your target customers' needs, wants, and demands. So depending on who your customers are, where they are they a business customer? Are they a consumer? Right, you're going to have different pricing strategies. So understanding what your customer wants from you is really important, and who they are and what they want. Right, you have to offer products that satisfy those needs, demands, and wants. Right, and so sometimes our customers don't know what they want, but we can tell them right through promotion is how they tell us, you need to be more beautiful, more thin, well, whatever, right? And they're like, oh, then we need all these billions of dollars of face lotions and things like that, right? So it's like getting this demand and want. And then providing customers with quality service, convenience, and value. However your customer defines it, and you can produce it. So different people will have different definitions for quality, right? Their service requirements may be very different. Convenience, basically what do they need from you? That's kind of a way to think about that. So if you're at a farmer's market, not everybody's going to carry cash. So maybe the ability to actually accept credit cards. Maybe it's a point of convenience, right? So thinking about what does that mean for your particular customer? And then value. How do not only you communicate value, but you provide this perceived value to customers? And I want to talk about quality a little bit, because a lot of times when I talk to small business owners, they're like, well, of course my product is the highest quality. And I'm like, well, everybody says that, right? So what do you do that communicates value? So what is it that you have that actually is above the norm, that actually says something is high quality? So what's the standard? And then how do you go above that actually makes something higher quality? Because that's what you can communicate to your customer and translate that through the price. Right? So those go kind of hand in hand. But if everybody has high quality, then everybody's the same. Then everybody's medium, right? So kind of how do you communicate that quality? And then how does that translate to the price that you're providing? So I always like to link the 4 Ps of marketing, which is this kind of product, price, place, which is really distribution and promotion, to what the customer is thinking about, where they're thinking about what's the benefit to me, right? They're thinking about what's the customer cost. So what's it costing me? So you might be thinking, oh, your product is $3.50, but they're thinking, well, this actually cost me, I drove here, there's a whole bunch of people, I couldn't find parking, right? There's sometimes a lot of hidden costs that we don't think about. That's why convenience and value come into that. So thinking about the customer cost, the convenience, basically, again, that place, how does somebody get your product? And then communication. So you're thinking, oh, I'm advertising, I'm doing these other promotional strategies, and they're thinking, oh, this is how you're communicating with me. So if you can get in the frame of mind of the customer foresees, then you can get a better understanding of how your customer is perceiving you and your product. So what's a market? So market is the set of all actual and potential customers of your product, right? So the actual customer is the one who's actually buying from you, but then you might have a whole bunch of other potential customers. So how do you make a potential customer an actual customer? That's through this marketing and promotion and price signals. But consumer interest is not enough. So a lot of times people will say, well, I have all these people and they are super interested in me. They said that I have the best pie ever, or salsas. I've seen a lot of salsas, right? And they're like, oh, that's great. Well, I'm always like, okay, turn around and said, this is going to cost you $7 or whatever the price is. If they buy it, you have a market. If not, then you have really nice friends and family, right? So thinking about, because getting somebody from interest to actually buying your product is important. So again, that goes to understanding your market. So who are your customers and what do they want? And then who are your competitors and what do they bring? Because that also has an effect on the price that you're going to have and that you're going to be able to charge somebody, is actually looking at your competitors as well. Sometimes we tend to be think about pricing as only an internal matter. Well, this is exactly what it cost me to make the product. Hopefully, you know exactly what it costs you to make the product, right, to produce it. But there's those external factors of what can your customer pay, but also what are your competitors out there doing as well, and how are you communicating that pricing or how you're different. So in terms of defining your customers, right, you want to know what are the characteristics of your customers, where are they coming from, what's their income range, do they, will they be, why will they be your customer, and what do they require from you to remain your customer? Can we get to mute somebody?
Heidi, I think you can go ahead and mute them. They look kind of busy right now.
Yeah.
If you go to their name and click.
There you go. Yeah. Thanks, Heidi. They're distracting me because I'm like, oh, that looks interesting. So, and so, okay, so what, why will they be your customer, and what do they require from you to stay your customer, right? So those are all questions to think about, and that translates to the price that you can actually charge your customer. So we tend to think about then, or what are the benefits that a customer is going to want from you, right? Or how are you going to be able to communicate that benefits? So we have these value benefits that are kind of quality, which we talked about a little bit. How do you communicate quality? Delivery, service, technology, personalization, shopping ease, all of those are value benefits. Then you've got these cost benefits, which is lower cost. Scale saving is basically providing, if you can sell a lot, you can have a scale savings to somebody. Maybe your customer is a business customer. You can provide them a large volume. That's scale savings. Scope savings is, let's say you're selling to a chef. Then you can provide them a variety of products. So that's the scope savings that you could be providing versus scale. Learning, how if you're learning something, the first time you do something, you might not be as effective, but as you learn more, you become better at it, right? So you can lower your costs through learning. And then some organizational practices. But all of those are benefits that you can provide. So it really depends on your customer, whether they're a consumer, whether they're a business, right? A chef, a restaurant, a farm to school, what kind of benefits they might be looking for, right? So sometimes we tend to think about only quality, but there are business consumers that might be thinking about other benefits that you can provide. So when we're thinking about our competitors, right? So we're talking about consumer, now we have competitors. There's also who we need to think about when we're thinking about pricing. There are things that we need to consider. So the health of the economy, right? We've had inflation, that you have to think about those things. Defining your competitors. What opportunities there might be for you to have either scale savings or scope savings. Threats that you might see out there, right? So farming, you're going to have, the weather is a threat. It can sometimes be an opportunity, but sometimes it's a threat. So what are the threats out there? More competitors, competitor knowledge, supplier power, right? So we were talking about, somebody said that they had gotten all of their seeds. Right? So those are your suppliers, right? There might be maybe a shortage of seeds of something, right? So thinking about that's going to affect your pricing. New competitors that might be coming into the market. Any substitute products that might be out there for your product. Buyer power, right? So if you are, let's say, selling to a handful of restaurants, maybe they've got some buyer power. Industry rivalry. So how many competitors are out there? Government regulations, the general environment, right? So all of these are things that are kind of industry things that you need to think about, but also thinking about your competitors, because all of those things actually affect your pricing. So I like to have like these little charts here that says, okay, here's what my customer wants, here's what my competitors offer, and here's what I offer. So here's just an example. So my customer wants quality. They might want exclusivity. They want my lower prices, which kind of doesn't make sense with exclusivity and quality. But, consumers might like a whole bunch of things, and delivery, right? And so, and they might have ranked some of these things, right? So they might say, well, let's say a chef says, well, my first thing is quality and exclusivity, that you're only doing this for me. Well, they can also want lower prices, right? So you have to think about, they might have to rank some of those. But then you can think about, okay, my competitor is great at offering some of these or not. So they might have lower prices, but their quality is not that good, right? Or they can't provide them the specific products. So thinking about that, and then what you can offer, right? Because that's going to help you, again, think about pricing strategies, but thinking about how you're communicating why your price might be higher than your competitor, right? Or maybe how your price might be lower than a competitor. Sometimes it doesn't have to be about your price being higher. It might be about price being lower. Right? So all of those things are things to consider. So again, pricing strategy is the only component that directly produces revenue. All in all, right, we can communicate value and all the things, but price is the only thing that says price and quantity equals revenue, right? So that's why this is so important and why it can be so stressful. Because you think, oh, if I make a mistake, you can leave money on the table, right? If you make a mistake, but also you could be undercutting your costs if you don't know exactly if you don't have the right price. So I can understand that it can be very, very stressful, right? And it's linked to both the position that you have. So positioning means the place that you have in the mind of your consumer compared to other people, right? That's a positioning tactic. That's why we think about our competitors. What do they offer? What do I offer? Because that's how we position ourselves relative to others, and how our buyers will think of us relative to others. That's positioning, right? And then targeting, who you're targeting, right? So that's why it's linked to those things. That's why I said, got to understand your customer, what they want, and then how you would price appropriately. So it depends on three major factors: your cost structure, got to know how much it costs to produce things, what the market will bear, basically how much your consumer is willing to pay, and your desired image. And in that desired image part is all the things I was just talking about. Again, it means service costs. What does it cost you? Supply and demand, right? Thinking about those as factors. Sales volume, how much you can sell, right? How much quantity it is. Competitors' prices, your competitive advantage, right? If nothing else, I should be able to ask anybody to unmute and say, what is one thing you do better than everybody else? What's your competitive advantage, right? I should do that as a test. The economic conditions, right? We've had inflation, all of these different things. Your business location is going to impact your pricing. Seasonal factors will impact your pricing. Your credit terms and purchase discounts. So what you get from suppliers and what you offer to your buyers affects your pricing. And of course, your desired image. So here's just kind of a picture of how those factors affect. So we talked about the price floor is what are the costs. The price ceiling is what the market will bear. So and in between are all of those factors that we just went through that affect your price, right? So if we do it too low, we leave a lot of money on the table. If we put it too high, we might be a little bit too high above what our consumers can bear. But the objective would be to get as close to what the market will bear, because that's where you're going to get all the profit, right? Anything above the price ceiling is above break even, because you can basically say price floor, you're just breaking even. You're not making any money, covering costs, right? So you want to be above that, but then you have to think about all those things to gauge where you need to be. I'm just going to go through some different ways of thinking about pricing, introducing new products. And these don't have to be new in terms of like a tomato doesn't have to be a new product, but you're coming into the market as new. So 3 goals is basically you want to get your product accepted, right? If you're going into a new market, you want somebody to buy it, basically. You want to make sure that you're maintaining market share as competition grows, right? You can pretty much guarantee food is a very competitive business. Super competitive business, right? So we all eat a multitude of things. And so it's super competitive. People go out of business all the time. So you have to think that competition may grow, people may come in and out. So thinking about that. And then of course you want to earn a profit. You want to make a good living doing what you do. And you're going to have to, right? And by doing that, you need to earn a profit. So there's 3 strategies usually. You're going to have a penetrate, and I'm going to go through these. There's a penetration strategy, a skimming strategy, and then a sliding down the demand curve strategy. And all of these are not appropriate all the time. It really depends on the product or how you're going into the market and your cost structure. So the penetration strategy, the objective of that is to have a high sales volume as soon as possible through lower price and quick market access. So basically you're saying, oh, I have a price. I know that I can produce this for a lower price. So I can just get a profit and I'm going to be lower than anybody else. So I'm going to be able to sell a lot, right? You have a lot of quantity can be produced at this kind of lower price in the market. And so I'm going to get a lot of quick market access. I'm going to get a lot of penetration, basically. I'm going to get a lot of market share because I can do lower price, right? So the price is usually really low price products that have really low differentiation, right? So if you're selling, I'm going to know a regular old tomato, right? And so there might not be a lot of differentiation, but you're like, well, based on my cost structure, the learning, what I think I can bear and where I'm at, I can actually provide this at a lower price than my competitors and actually sell a lot because I have a lot of volume. So usually profits are going to be smaller because you need to get acceptance. Then you've got skimming, which is used to introduce a new product into a market with little or no competition, right? So let's say you're going into the new farmers market and you have kind of really niche vegetables that are nobody else has. That would be a new product, right? So there's not a lot of competition for your particular products. So let's say it's a new squash or a new type of melon or something like that. That's very individual and very new. There's not going to be a lot of competition at first, right? Because as soon as other people see that you're making money, they're going to go into that. But there might not be a lot of competition at first. So then you set the price that more than covers your costs, right? So you're going to have a higher profit margin for that particular product because it's relatively new. But then as competition comes in, your price is going to lower. So basically in skimming, I'll go back, you're getting very close to where what consumers are willing to pay, much more above the price ceiling. In the penetration, you're closer to that price floor, if you want to think about it in our diagram. Here, you're closer to the ceiling. In the penetration one, you're closer to the floor. In sliding down the demand curve, you basically introduce a product at high price, knowing that there's going to be a lot of competition, and pretty soon you're going to lower your prices, right? So you're going to say, well, I'm introducing an heirloom tomato, and I'm going to go as high a price as I can, knowing that there's going to be, as the season goes on, there's going to be a lot more people, and I'm going to have to lower my price, right? So it slides down the demand curve pretty quickly because there's just that much more competition, right? So you start off at and then you become kind of the high volume producer. A lot of times we'll see this more with technology. So think of TVs, right? As when the new model comes out and it's really high technology, they're super expensive. But then as other people start doing the same thing, you can now buy the same TV you bought 2 years ago for $1,500 for $300, right? That's a sliding down the demand curve type of thing. So we see this a lot with technology in particular. Super, because you get a lot of people that are early adopters that really want the new iPhone, the new something. But as more people come in, they're sliding, right? The price goes down. So that's where we usually see this. So there's 2 forces really that really can affect your pricing. One is the image that your price conveys. So a lot of times we try to say our product is the highest quality, but then we want to give it a really low price, which in the mind of the consumer is kind of like, well, they say that it's high quality, but they're priced lower than everybody else. What's wrong with this? right? So that is the image that you convey. So price does convey a particular image. So again, that's why I was saying, think about what do you mean by quality? Think about how you communicate that compared to what other people have as quality in the standard. And that allows you to communicate why prices are higher or lower, right? So I guess that quality and volume. And then you want to make sure that you're considering your competitors' prices as well, because you've got to communicate that, right? Somebody comes in and you say, well, why is your price $2 more or 50 cents more? You want to be able to say, well, my price is 50 cents more because this and this and this and this. And people will be like, oh, okay. I think where business owners have a hard time communicating that is to say, well, my price is higher, but they can't communicate why their price is higher. Because you might not have looked at your competitors' prices, or you don't understand what your consumer wants, right? So sometimes your consumer wants a lot more convenience, and that costs money, right? Right. So then that's why you want this and this and this, and that costs more money, and that's why the price is higher. If you didn't want all these services, then I can give it to you for this, which would be lower. Oh, sorry, forgot I had a couple more things. So again, competitors, location, and the nature of competing goods, right? That I was just talking about. So when you do a sales forecast, and as I'm going to go through a quick sales forecast, you want to make sure you're looking at your most likely scenario, your pessimistic scenario, and your optimistic scenario. And a lot of times as we get into it, we tend to think of things in the most optimistic way, right? But we want to make sure we're looking at, okay, if I'm going to do a sales forecast, you want to make sure that, okay, if things go wrong, what's it going to take? If things go really, really good, what's it going to take? Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of yogurt to just do a quick sales forecast. So let's say I'm looking at the population for Tippecanoe County. It's 153,000 people and such. Per capita consumption, they eat about 9.2 pounds of yogurt. So my per capita consumption, I'm going to put it in cups because it's a little easier. So 32-ounce cups, you have 5 cups per year. And these are numbers you can get from the Economic Research Service. They tell you what people eat and how much they eat of every manageable thing. So vegetables, yogurt, that's where I got this information. And food away from home and food at home. So all of those things. So my total demand for Tippecanoe County is 769,375 cups of yogurt, right? So my average price per cup is $1.20. My sales potential then would be that 120 times that 700 and whatever many cups. So it's 923,000 odd dollars, right? That's my sales potential, right? Because not everybody eats yogurt. There are other people in the market selling yogurt, right? So remember, those are the potential customers that I was talking about really earlier. Now you have to think about my actual customers. So let's say I think, okay, I can do market penetration at 10%. And everybody always uses 10%, but sometimes depends on the market. Let's say you can. So let's say you were in the beverage industry. And you said, oh, I can have 10% of the beverage industry. That's in the billions of dollars, right? So it depends on the industry, how much market penetration you can get. So my sales estimate would be 10% of that, like $992,000 in Tippecanoe County in terms of my actual customers that I think I might be able to get through promotion and all these other things. So then translating that into total cups, I'd have to be able to sell, right, and produce 76,938 cups, 30 cups of 32-ounce cups of yogurt, right? So that's kind of a way of doing a sales forecast. So, and I'll show you a little bit why we do this sales forecast for that. So, okay, pricing. Now let's talk about different types of ways of going to do pricing. So we can do the follow the leader pricing, which is basically looking at what are our competitors doing and kind of following them along, right? That's the follow the leader. Below market pricing is thinking, well, I'm going to have a discount image because I think I can be the lowest cost producer. And so I'm going to go look at what my competitors are doing, and I'm going to price below that. And there are some regulatory things you have to worry about because you'd have to be much bigger, but companies can get into trouble with this because they might be thinking, people might accuse them of dumping, right? If they think you're lowering the cost to get rid of competitors, that's actually called dumping. And so but we won't worry about that today because you have to be like a Coca-Cola for somebody to take you to court over dumping. But let's say that Coca-Cola said, oh, I'm going to really underprice Pepsi and try to get them out of the, out of the industry. Maybe at some point you guys will be so big that somebody can accuse you of dumping, but who knows? So then there's cost plus pricing. So basically that's looking at what are my costs plus profit margin, right? So cost plus profit margin. And that's what I'm going to price it at. So it's going to cost me $1.20 for my cups of yogurt. And then I want another $1 on top of that of profit. That's cost plus profit. So now I'm going to sell it for $2.20. I don't consider my competitors' prices at all. That's just on me, right? Then there's the absorption costing. Basically, that's looking at all what it costs me to manufacture my product, and I'm going to absorb it. That's fixed costs, marketing, advertising, everything. And I'm going to make sure that what I cost it at is exactly absorbs everything. Then we've got variable direct costing, which is basically looking at, okay, what does it cost me to produce my yogurt, just my yogurt? I'm not going to think about fixed costs. So I'm not going to think about my utilities, or maybe utilities go up and down. I'm not going to think about rent or mortgage, just direct costing, right? I'm just looking at my variable costs, and that's what I'm going to cost it at. But that's cost it, not necessarily price it, right? That's the costing. Then you have value-based pricing, which basically says I'm going to start at a reference price. So I'm going to look around at my competitors and have a reference price based on my competitors, and because I'm going to look at the very best substitutes out there. And then I'm going to adjust my price based on these value things that my customers want and that I can provide. So I might look at how much my customers value convenience or taste or the image and prestige that I can allow them, right? I package it very nicely with a nice ribbon bow that my customers want. So I'm going to make it better. The lower, the effectiveness that I have. Maybe I'm much more productive and I can produce more and I'm much more effective in the way I communicate. Or, the maintenance costs, right? You might have higher maintenance costs than your competitor. So you kind of look at this reference price and then start going up or down based on, remember that competitor thing that we did with what do my customers want, my competitors have? You look at that and you say, okay, based on those things, I can higher price, lower price. And again, in some ways, there's just no right way. It's basically looking at what are these different ways of thinking about pricing and costing and saying what works for you. And actually taking a few of these. So let's say you take absorption pricing where you're looking at all of your costs, but then you also look at value pricing where you're saying, okay, this is my cost, but now based on my competitors and what I see out there, I know that I can really charge this much more from what my costing is, right? Getting closer to that ceiling, but getting away from that pricing floor. So you can take a few of these and mesh them together. Okay, so now we're gonna look at break-even analysis. So break-even analysis is basically looking at what you're gonna earn. You neither make money nor lose money. You're just breaking even, okay? And this is useful because if you think about our sales forecast and how much we were pricing it and how many cups we need to make, it kind of gives you an idea of like, how much I need to sell it for, what's my price floor, and how much do I need to actually sell to break even? So it's not just on pricing, but it's pricing and costing and volume as well. So it's a good way of figuring that out. To do that, you need to be able to know and separate your total costs into variable costs, which means those costs that vary with production. So your seed costs would vary with how much you're going to produce, probably. Water costs. So you have to think about what are the costs that vary with quantity, and then what are your fixed costs, right? So those are the things that don't vary. So the cost of your land don't vary with how much you produce, right? If you didn't produce anything, you still have to pay probably rent or mortgage or something. All right, so we separate our variable and fixed costs. Again, variable costs are those things that vary with production, and fixed costs are those that don't vary with production. And depending on the business, those things may change. And this is the simple formula. It's not rocket science. It's very simple. So again, using our yogurt example, we have our fixed costs, and we divide it by the price and minus our variable costs. So using our example, I have a fixed cost of $40,000. So maybe my building and all of my equipment and everything that I'm paying is $40,000. Remember, my price for cups was $1.20. That's how much I was charging. And it cost me 45 cents, variable costs, right, to produce it. So my break-even volume, I'd have to sell 53,333 cups, right? But remember, my sales volume said that I could have a potential to sell 76,000, right? So that 20,000 would actually, 20,000 cups would allow you to have some profit. But you'd have to sell 53,000 at $1.20 and produce it for 45 cents, right? A variable cost to be able to break even. So this is not making any money. So let's say you're going to see, well, like, well, how much would I sell, or how much do I need to do if I actually wanted to make a profit, right? Just a standard profit. So you just use this formula, which is profit plus your variable costs times the quantity plus your fixed costs divided by the quantity produced, right? So that's going to tell you the break-even selling price with a profit. If you want to know what the break-even price is without a profit, you see I have a 0 there instead of a profit. I just put 0. Then it's my variable cost times quantity plus my fixed costs. So remember that 76,938 from earlier, that was our sales forecast. So I'd have to sell it at 97 cents per cup, right? To be able to just break even. Now, if I wanted to make a profit, right? Let's say I put in $20,000. That's not a humongous amount of profit, then that's going to change, right? That's going to change my price per cup then as I add that profit. So it gives you a sense of what the pricing floor is, right? We were selling it for $1.20, so we were still making a profit. So some disadvantages of break even is that it ignores your cash flow, right? It just says this is the cost, ignores the cash flow. It assumes that your fixed costs always remain constant, which isn't normally always true. It assumes that your variable costs change in direct proportion with sales volume. And remember that might not be true because we have this learning thing. So you might actually get better at it. And so you can lower your variable costs as you get better and bigger. And it assumes that your sales volume doesn't affect your unit price, which that might not necessarily be true. But it's a good way of kind of figuring out, okay, I need to sell this much to make a profit. I need to sell this much to just break even. And this is how much it's going to cost, right? So it's a good way of looking at it from both sides. So I want to end in the last few slides just talking about consumer perceptions and demand, right? Because this also has a bearing on your pricing and how much you can charge. Remember that price ceiling was what the customer will bear, which has a lot to do with consumer perception, right? So it's a major external factor affecting price. It's the difference between, and value is the difference between perceived benefits and perceived price. Remember when I had that price next to consumer cost, that C? That's the perceived price of your customer. So if they perceive the value to be higher than the perceived price, they think it's a great value. Right? A lot of times you'll be like, oh, this was great price. And you might have paid a lot for it, but you're like, I got so much value out of it. And I use it so much that it didn't matter that it was a higher price. And maybe you were originally thinking you were going to spend because you're getting a lot out of it. So again, it's that communicating value and quality that really makes the difference. Because it's the perceived price, not the actual price, right? That somebody might pay. Remember that that perceived price from the consumer includes parking, how easy it is to do business with you, customer service. Think about the last time you called somebody and nobody answered, or you're trying to make a complaint or get something taken care of. Every time that happens, the perceived price of that product went up and up and up. I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody says to you, you need to go to this steakhouse. It has the best steak you'll ever eat in your life. Best ever. It'll change your life forever, right? You go to the, hopefully there's no vegetarians on here, but that's how you use the steak. And you go like, oh, well, I'm going to go. So you go and you make a reservation, and the day of the reservation you go and you can't find parking. So it takes you a lot of time parking. It's raining. You get in and they lost your reservation, so you need to wait an extra 30 minutes than your reservation time. That perceived price of that steak went up and up and up. That better be, now it's not, doesn't need to change your life. It needs to change your life forever, right? Because the price went up because of all the things you went up there and the value, right? So those are the things to think about of when you do business with somebody, is how easy is it to really do business with you? Because that actual perceived price goes up and down based on that. So analyze, kind of try to understand what the perception is, their customer's perception of your prices, because that includes shipping, any hidden costs, any of those things. And so you can think about, two businesses and having that actual value and the perceived value, right? And so what the customer is thinking about might be like, well, their perceived value of firm A is higher and their actual value was actually lower, right? But that perception, right, increase the total value that the customer is really thinking about. And how are you communicating that? So I just have a brief thing here. I'll use my yogurt example of how you create value and communicate value. This is just for yogurt. So I might create value for yogurt by the quality of the milk. Is big on, how much you have quality. My yogurt maker, my equipment, quality of people, unique products, all of these can create value. But I communicate value through advertising, my sales team, which is you as the owner, or communicates value. You're your sales team, your customers lists, right? Your physical facility, if people are going in to look at you, how it looks, right? All of that communicates value. Awards that you might get, your reputation and image. Remember, we talk about image and what the image, newsletters, tastings, special events. How do you, any kinds of ways that you can think of that you can create value and communicate value is really important. So customer perception and demand. So customers are less sensitive to price when they're not aware of or can easily compare substitutes. But now with the web and, if you're in a farmer's market and everybody around you is selling the same tomato, they're obviously very aware of your competitors' prices, right? But if you're in the desert and you're the only one selling water, pretty much you can charge whatever. They're not going to be that sensitive to price. So thinking about those different things. They're less sensitive to price if they're unaware of the price substitutes, right? So again, is this, if the customer is not aware of the pricing, they're less aware, less price sensitive. If they perceive your product or you to be highly differentiated, they believe in you, they believe in your products and the quality, the consistency of your product, then they're less price sensitive. They're less apt to say, oh, but this other person is selling something for 10 cents lower, so I'm going to go to them, right? Those are the things that make somebody loyal when they're less price sensitive. They're also less sensitive when their costs, they have a hard time switching, right? So I have curly hair. I'm not going to switch hairdressers just because my hairdresser increased her price for $5. It will take me a lot to get to switch, right? I'm pretty loyal to her because it's hard to switch. So that's where customer loyalty and understanding what makes somebody loyal, because they're not going to switch, right? The switching cost will be too high. That's why your hairdresser or somebody that gives you a personal service talks to you and gets to know you, right? Because you're going to be loyal. So they're also less sensitive if they perceive the quality and the prestige to justify the price. Right? So they're going to be less sensitive if they think the quality is higher. Again, that's why you communicate quality, because they're less price sensitive. And they're also less price sensitive if it's insignificant or they're going to share the cost. So an example of that, think about you go to the Cheesecake Factory and you're all thinking, oh, I'm going to, do you want a dessert? I don't know. Do I want to pay $10 for a slice of pie? And then somebody says, oh, well, I'll share it with you. More likely, right? Not only share the calories, but share the price, right, of that piece of pie. So you're less apt to be price sensitive. Now, it doesn't matter what the price was because you're going to share it with somebody, right? Right? It's a less significant. If it's a lower budget for you, then you're going to be less price sensitive. But that means you need to understand your customer to see what makes them less price sensitive. And here is just a way of thinking about price and quality. So I've got these different strategies that you might have. If you have high quality, high price, then you have a premium strategy, right? So you can think about how that perception is happening for your customer. If you got low quality, low price, then it's usually an economy strategy, right? Usually Walmart goes to this kind of good value strategy, right? It's a medium price, a low price, but medium quality. Usually, if you think about good value, what you don't want to be is in the rip-off strategy or the false economy strategy. Otherwise, overcharging, right? So thinking about if you have low quality but high price, that's kind of a rip-off. That means your customer is going to be their customer once. But thinking about, where do you land on some of these, right? And how are you communicating price and value based on that? And then I'll end just thinking about price adaptation. Sometimes, we can adapt prices as we go along. So really think about, what are your internal pricing factors, right? Those are things internal, our cost structure that indicate that price floor. What are those external factors that indicate our price ceiling, competitors, consumers, economy? Those are those external things. And price adaptations kind of helps you modify and fine tune those prices. But if you know those two, the ceiling and the floor, then it's basically thinking about how you're going to get in between those, right? So you can lower your prices through discounts and allowances. So sometimes if we're not sure how much our customers can pay, we can say we can set a price and then provide like a coupon or a discount. You want to be careful that you don't get your customers used to that. But you can provide that to kind of gauge where your customers are. And then you can add value by bundling or product enhancement, right? So you might say, well, if you have it's 5 for $4, or if you have this and this, we can bundle it, right? And then kind of charge a higher price by bundling. And that's it for me, ending there. So hopefully I didn't take too much time and I gave you plenty of time, Heidi.
No, that was great, Maria. Does anybody have questions for Dr. Marshall?
Are you
And
able
I'll
to
be happy to share the slides as well.
Perfect.
Great, so we have some great pricing gurus now.
Well, I know that was a lot to take in. So thank you, Maria, to be willing to share your slides, because that's a lot to think about and kind of revisit as everybody's getting closer to setting prices, planning their crops, looking at their costs, considering what their prices and revenues might be. It's not easy, is it, folks?
No, my head's spinning right now.
All right. Well, if there aren't any questions right now, then Heidi can take it away. Feel free to enter questions in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat. I am going to have to leave a little bit early. I have another Zoom presentation that starts at 7 that I just need to open up. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thanks, Brooke. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Excellent. Let's see. Can everybody see my presentation screen? Wonderful. Good. So what I do appreciate about what Dr. Marshall presented on is there were good ways to approach how you're presenting your product. I especially appreciate the perceived value, right? Because we're working very hard on our farms or in our gardens every day. We know what that value is, but sometimes we can't always communicate that to the people who are purchasing our product. And that's really very key. And to also try not to take it personally when someone comes up to your farmer's market booth and says, $5 for a tomato, when they don't know the 16 weeks of effort you've put into producing that crop. Take it as a time to educate folks, help them understand how much you care, how much love and effort you put into that product. That can help them understand and maybe perceive a higher value from what you're producing. So what I'm actually going to talk about is how to figure out your costs. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of math. I know math isn't something that everybody loves to do, but I'm hoping that this will be straightforward enough that you will be able to figure out the cost of what it costs you to produce your products, and then gauge your pricing accordingly using some of the strategies that Dr. Marshall gave us. So the goals today. So identify your financial goals. What are you hoping to accomplish by selling goods off your farm? Understanding the fixed versus variable costs. Dr. Marshall hit on that earlier. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about those things, and then we're going to practice setting some prices. Okay. So your financial goals. We all have different financial goals for our farm. Sometimes it's just paying for the cost of having a farm or a piece of property. It helps offset some of those costs. Some of us actually want to make a living wage from our farm. I know that's ultimately my goal. I'm not quite there yet, but that helps me determine how I should price my products. For some folks, it's just as simple as a tax break, right? So, hey, I'm working on this land. It gives me an agriculture exemption, and therefore my taxes are less, my property taxes. Or even sometimes, because it's a small business, there are some small business tax breaks you can get from that as well. I am not a CPA, I'm not an accountant. So if you do want actual tax advice, definitely talk to someone with that expertise. I'm not soliciting any advice as an accountant at all. Some of us are just hoping for the lifestyle. Maybe we like being outside, working in a yard, growing our own food. Those are great reasons to have a garden. Some people are just hoping for some extra money for that vacation. Getting away from the farm for a week in a year might be kind of nice. And then other people maybe even paying for school. There are a multitude of reasons why you might want to make money from your growing space. Okay, and that's going to affect how you price your goods. Okay. Dr. Marshall showed us some really great market research, some actual formal tools you can use to do some of that market research. But as an individual who's been at a farmer's market, I can't tell you the number of times I've had some of my fellow growers come to my booth and say, Heidi, how much are you charging for those cucumbers? And my price signs are there and prominent so they can see that, but I'll have a discussion with them about why I priced my goods that way. And then they go and price theirs the same, perhaps. There's nothing wrong with that. That's like what Dr. Marshall was talking about, seeing what the market is bearing. What are people paying in the grocery stores? What are people paying at a produce auction where it's a higher volume? That kind of gives you that price ceiling point. And then I'm going to talk to you coming up soon about finding that price floor. So what your actual costs are. Okay. This is useful, but it should not be used for determining what you should price your product at. You need to know the cost of production for your products. I'm not going to pay someone to eat my broccoli, right? Just like you're not going to go to work and pay your employee to do an Excel spreadsheet. You're not doing that Excel spreadsheet and paying your employee that. So the cost of production is really what we're going to focus on here. So again, pricing is not guesswork, and it should be based on actual numbers. So how do we figure out what our actual numbers are? Well, you keep good records. How many of you are keeping records currently? Maybe. I know it's really difficult. So I encourage you to start keeping records. Thanks, Nicole, for that thumbs up. I see that. Keeping records, make it simple. Okay, that could be any system that works for you. It could be a clipboard at the entry to your wash and pack station where you're just recording, this is what I've done today. Okay, where are you spending your time? How much are you harvesting? How many broccoli plants did you put in the ground? Those sorts of things are important to record. Okay, but also try not to drown in the details. Okay, I'll give you an example. My heat's running. I'll give you an example of this. When I first started farming, I moved to Michigan's Upper Peninsula in the middle of winter. And so I wasn't actually growing anything at the time because we were buried in snow, but we did buy some little chickens, okay? And I spent that winter in the chicken coop just watching the chickens. And I ended up writing down in a calendar every day that a chicken laid an egg and which chicken it was. That's overkill. But it also taught me, like, what could I generally expect from a chicken each week, right? And so that was my initial, that's how I was keeping records. Nowadays, we have fantastic cell phones. It's like a portable computer. You can take pictures of things that you're doing. You can write little notes. There's a notes function on here. You can even leave yourself voice memos of what you're doing, how long you're spending doing something, if you prefer not to put pen to paper, okay? But choose a system that works for you. And think about also what you're keeping track of. Is it stuff that you're actually going to look at and analyze? Or is it just more data or more numbers that won't mean anything to you at the end of the year? Okay. So try to keep it simple. And we're also going to look at the variable costs and the fixed costs and the overhead costs. And like Dr. Marshall said, those fixed and overhead costs kind of get lumped together oftentimes. All right. So variable costs, costs that change with your change in production. Okay, so that's specific to an enterprise. And by enterprise, we mean like I'm raising pigs. So everything related to the production of pigs that changes would be a variable cost for the pig enterprise. This gets really tricky when we look at a market garden, right? Because separating out my lettuce from my tomatoes, from my cucumbers can be, it feels like you're having to pull teeth to suss out those numbers. Okay, but I'm going to try and simplify it for you. So we can look at our seeds. That's really straightforward, right? We know how many seeds we ordered from the company. We actually have a receipt or an invoice from the seed company that tells us how much we paid for how many seeds. The packaging. So when I harvest my cucumbers, is it going into a package? If it is, then I know how many packages I need for X number of cucumbers, and I can suss out how much that cost per unit is in packaging. Electricity can get a little bit trickier, right? And so we'll, if you're using electricity for multiple enterprises, so I'm using it for my lettuce and my spinach and my broccoli, then I can divide that evenly or on a percentage basis based on what crops are using it. But if I have crops that aren't using electricity, then I don't want to necessarily assign that cost to that enterprise. Okay. The same goes with water. Some crops are fine without water. I grow my garlic without irrigating it most years. So I don't add water to my garlic pricing cost structure. Okay. And then the biggest money sink is labor, right? On a farm where you're the one doing a lot of that work. Maybe you're hiring someone to help you do some of that work, keeping those weeds at bay, making sure the bugs or pests are not decimating your crop. That's value, right? That's part of the cost of doing that business Okay, so the SARE, S-A-R-E, the Sustainable Ag Research Education, they're a nationwide group that advocates for sustainable farming. And they say that $25 per hour is the typical rate that you would charge for labor. I don't know about the rest of you, but that's a pretty good rate. Like I would go work on other people's farms if I could get paid $25 an hour. But that's the number we're going to use in our cost calculations. Because really, when you think about it, if you're going to hire someone onto your farm, you're going to pay their all of the taxes and fees associated with having a worker on your farm. It probably comes close to $25 an hour. Okay. And then for labor, there are a few ways to track labor. Like I was talking about before, just keeping an actual record, pen and paper, at the end of the day saying, well, this is how much time I spent in broccoli today. This is how much time I spent weeding today. Those can all be helpful when you're coming up with your final prices. There are also some of these apps or software packages, something called Simple Time Tracker. You can download on your phone and input all the different enterprises you have and basically enter in the field while you're doing your actual labor. Okay, I've done broccoli weeded for 10 minutes, done. Now I'm going to trellis tomatoes. That took me 2 hours because I'm really slow at that. And then eventually all of that data can be imported into your spreadsheet for calculating your costs. So there are a couple of pieces of technology out there if you want to go beyond just the pen and paper. And also when it comes to labor, it's important to keep track of obviously paid labor. That's a direct expense, but also unpaid labor. Farmers are notorious for discounting their time. Well, I'm just in charge of the business, so my labor doesn't count. And if I make a profit, then that will be my payment. But what happens if I get in a car accident and I break my leg? Is the farm gonna keep running? If I want it to keep running, I'm going to have to hire someone in. And so that time piece, the labor piece, is really important to include. And it can be really hard for us to give ourselves that credit, right? Again, when it comes to knowing where your labor is going, try not to get lost in those details. Any piece of data you can include is helpful. It's better than a guess 12 months after that labor piece happened, right? So even if it's a once a week, you sit down and kind of guesstimate, I spent X amount of time in each of these crops. That's helpful. That's better data makes better pricing decisions. Okay. Labor can also be helpful in terms of figuring out which crops are most profitable as far as your time goes. Okay, so an example of this is my husband and I grew peanuts one year, which grow quite well down here in Southeast Indiana, but we probably spent at least 40 hours of time weeding them and hilling them and then digging them out of the ground by hand and letting them sit in the sun and then pulling all of those nuts off the plants by hand. And in the end, when we calculated the total cost associated with this crop, it was 95% labor is where that cost was. And it was $9 a pound for peanuts. And you can go to the grocery store and get peanuts for 50 cents a pound. And so nobody was going to buy my peanuts at my cost of $9 a pound, right? And so is that really even a crop worth growing? Not for sale to the public, but for personal enjoyment, maybe, if I have enough time on my hands. Okay. So labor tracking can be really helpful. And necessary, I should say. So let's do an example of variable costs. We saw that seeds for this head lettuce, $4.50 for 500 seeds of lettuce. The packaging cost me 5 cents per bag. I'm going to put a head of lettuce in a plastic bag. Okay, and that's because I can get those in bulk. I'm buying more than 500 at a time, but I'm going to do multiple crops, so I'm not worried about how many I have in my possession at any given time, just that it costs me 5 cents per bag. The water, in order to get my lettuce to harvestable size, cost me about $20 per bed of 250 heads. Okay. And then the labor, I used 5.17 hours. So it took me 10 minutes to plant, 2 hours to weed. So I'm really good at growing weeds. It takes me a long time to weed during the year. And then harvesting. Harvesting takes a long time because I have to dip those heads in some cool water to pull off the field heat and let them dry out and then pack them in the bags. So a total of 5.17 hours at $25 per hour. So you can see this cost, the seed for 500 heads, packaging for 500 heads is $25. The water, because I'm using 2 beds, you saw up here, it was $20 for 250. So I had to double that, is $40. And the labor came to $129.25. So my total is $198.75 for 500 heads of lettuce. We divide that, and it costs me total variable cost 40 cents per head. Okay, pretty straightforward. I feel like variable costs are a little bit easier for us to identify, because those are the pieces that we're actually having to use to produce. Okay, so I had to buy that seed. That's upfront in my face. Whereas when we get to some of the fixed costs, they're maybe a little bit back of the mind. Okay, any questions about these variable costs? No. Oh, Nicole. Yeah. You're muted, Nicole.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for sharing and helping us out with this overhead and fix. But are you calculating this once a week, once a month, or how are you doing? I know I keep track of everything, but I haven't got down to the calculation part. But I know I document every time I do anything about growing. So if you can specify.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Nicole. This would be on a season basis. So I would take all the data, ideally, of taking that crop to its end piece. So the end point, whether I'm selling it at the farmer's market or to a restaurant, and I figure out what all those costs are. So I could do that in the growing season of when I'm producing that, but it's also helpful to step back at the end of the year and see how those costs might have changed throughout the season, right? Maybe I had to, the cost for fuel increased or doubled, and that might change my costs, my variable costs, or my overhead costs, whatever it happens to be, however that factors in. And so looking at it from a year's perspective and maybe adjusting some of those calculations to help me determine my price for next season. Did that help? Okay. Good. Any other questions about those variable costs? We'll have some more time for questions at the end too. So if you're still mulling it over in your head, and chances are, if you have a question, someone else on this call has a question, so don't hesitate to ask. So the more complex piece of this calculation is the overhead and fixed costs. And that's because overhead costs are not directly related to your production. That's your rent or mortgage. That's your computer or your digital tool subscriptions or your internet or your phone, your insurance, things that maybe we're only making that payment once a month or once a year annually or even quarterly. So they're not necessarily at the forefront of our thinking. Okay, but they are the cost to run this business or to make this garden work. And so they're important to include in the calculating the cost of our goods. Okay. Other fixed costs, which are related to production, but they don't change with your production levels. And Dr. Marshall touched on this earlier too. It's like, so I have my farmer's market tent, my display table. Just because I'm only producing 500 heads of lettuce instead of 1,200 heads of lettuce, I still have that farmer's market tent. Okay, there was some investment in that good, and I have to offset that investment. Okay, equipment that you're using to farm with that is used for multiple crops sometimes. That's an investment. We want to make sure that we are setting aside some value to that. Anything like fencing, wells or hoses or sprinklers, season extension supplies, those all count as overhead or fixed costs. And so here's where some more math comes in, calculating and assigning these fixed costs. So these overhead costs are usually assigned with a depreciation schedule, which means something is losing value over time. Okay, a cost per year or a cost per unit is pretty typical. But there are two different types of depreciation. Okay, there's the tax, the IRS depreciation schedules. That's not what I'm talking about here today. Again, consult with a certified public accountant if you need some information on that. We're going to be approaching it more from the budgeting standpoint. So thinking about the useful life of that good. Okay. Another way to think about it is how much money should you be putting back in order to replace that item when its useful life is over. Okay. And so one of the simple calculations we can use is what's the purchase price of that product? What's the salvage price? Meaning at the end of its life, can I sell that for some sort of compensation? Some things you can't. Some things don't have a salvage price. Some things do. And we're going to divide that by the useful life in years, okay, or months, whatever it happens to be. So let's do one. I am paying for a community garden space. So it's a rent agreement. Okay. The cost to rent is $120 per year. Okay. The salvage price at the end of the year, am I getting money back for the rental? Nope, I'm not at all. So there's no salvage there. And the lifespan of this agreement is 1 year. Okay. This is a really simple example. So we plug that in, $120 minus the salvage price divided by the useful life, $120 per year. Okay. So how do we even assign that to my different crops? Okay. In my garden, let's say I have 10 beds in my garden in that rental space. $120 divided by the 10 beds is $12 per bed. So whatever I'm growing in each of those beds can be assigned $12 of value. For example, if I have 2 beds of tomatoes, 2 beds times $12, it costs me $24. When I go to calculate the cost of my tomatoes, the cost of production, I can add $24 to that cost because I'm having to pay for that land, the space where I'm growing it. 5 beds of lettuce, 5 beds times $12 is $60. Okay, you see how this works out? It's just a matter of dividing out that asset, that piece of hard good, and assigning some value. And what's tricky about it is when you have a diversified crop, right? If I'm growing more than just tomatoes in my garden, it gets more complicated about how to assign those costs. But it's definitely doable. We'll do a little more complex overhead cost. Let's say you're trying to scale up and you need some cold storage space. So you buy a CoolBot walk-in storage container. Okay. The cost to buy this 8x8 storage container is $9,000. Okay, that's a steep price. That's a pretty hefty investment, right? At the end of its useful life, I can probably sell that for $1,000. Okay, someone would probably buy that off me for $1,000. And its lifespan is about 10 years. Okay, so if we plug that in to our calculation, the purchase price, $9,000, minus the salvage price, divided by 10 years. So that's $8,000 divided by 10 years. It cost me $800 a year to offset the cost of this CoolBot. So how do we assign that? Okay, let's say I'm just harvesting lettuce. Okay, all I'm doing on my farm is growing lettuce, and I'm growing 500 heads of lettuce. If I take that
May
$800,
I interrupt just for a moment, just real quick to confirm that we'll be able to share your slides after tonight, correct?
yes.
Somebody
will
asked
send-
in the chat and I spoke for you and said yes, but I want to make sure people know that they'll be able to get these and think them over in their own time also.
Yeah. Good
Thanks, Heidi.
question.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I didn't see that in the chat, so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Sure.
Okay, so back to, we have 500 heads of lettuce. So we're taking that $800 and dividing it by the 500 heads of lettuce. This CoolBot cost me $1.60 per head of lettuce. Okay, not too bad. But hey, I've made this investment in this cold storage unit. I'm going to increase my production. I'm going to double my production of lettuce to try and utilize this asset as efficiently as possible. So if I have 1,000 heads of lettuce, I take that $800 a year and divide it by 1,000, making a total of 80 cents per head. So sometimes when you're actually expanding or trying to create efficiencies, sometimes it's utilizing that space as much as it can be utilized to decrease the actual cost per product. Okay. And then if we want to get even more complicated, we can say, hey, I'm actually growing more than just lettuce because I live in the real world and I want to make sure my farm has diversified sources of income because lettuce might not always be a viable crop. I take the same numbers that we said before at $800 a year, but I can assign the value or the cost by percent of use. Okay, so I'm going to grow lettuce and carrots and potatoes, and 25% of that CoolBot space, or 25% of the time that that CoolBot is running, is going to be for lettuce. So 25% of 800 is $225. So now for my lettuce crop, it's only $225 because I'm diversifying what's using that space. 40% of the space is being used for carrots, which is $360, and 35% of the space is for potatoes, $315. Okay, so that's how we can allocate it to those crops that are utilizing that overhead cost. And my tomatoes that aren't using this cold storage space, they don't have to help pay for the CoolBot because they're not using it. Okay. Questions so far about calculating these overhead costs? I know there's a lot of math there.
But it's making a lot of sense, Heidi. Thank you.
Okay. Alternatively, and this is, I hesitate just to share this slide because it gets sort of into those details like I was talking about, where I was just watching my chickens all day and recording lots of details. So for those of you who really love diving into the details and figuring out the exact cost of each good, this slide is for you. For those of you who are like, I can do without, you can ignore me for the next minute. Let's divide that storage space in the CoolBot and say, I can fit 50 storage totes in the cooler at any given time, okay? So I have $800 divided by 50 totes. Each tote is $16 worth of space, okay? And so then I can say, well, what am I putting in the totes? Each one of those totes, whatever I put in it, has that cost of $16, okay? So if I can fit 50 pounds of carrots in each tote, $16, which is the cost of that tote, divided by 50 pounds of carrots, it cost me 32 cents per pound of carrots. And so if I have 30 different crops in that cold storage space, it makes it a little bit easier to assign specifically to each of those enterprises. Okay. Again, 15 heads of lettuce in each tote, $16 divided by 15 heads is $1.07 per head of lettuce. So if we put them all in one place, okay, we're looking at that example that I gave about the head lettuce, 500 heads versus 1,000 heads. We've got our variable costs here, seeds, packaging, water, labor. And you can see in 500 heads, our cost doubles when we're doing 1,000 heads. That makes sense. We're assuming that it's a linear association. It's just double the cost because I'm doubling my actual production. But then we look at our fixed costs. Okay, I have $1,200 in my rent for my land. I have totes that are $75. You see, it's still the same number of totes no matter what I'm growing. Okay, my cold storage is still that $800 no matter how many heads of lettuce I'm putting in that cold storage. And then I've got some electricity that's helping to run the cold storage that cost me $400. It costs me $400 no matter how many things I have in there, right? 500 heads of lettuce, 1,000 heads of lettuce is still cost me $400, okay? So that total comes out to $2,673 to produce the 500 heads, or $2,872 for 1,000 heads. We divide that by the number of heads. So it costs me $5.35 to go a head of lettuce if I'm growing 500. It costs me $2.87 to grow a head of lettuce when I grow 1,000 heads. Which of those do you think I'll be more likely to make back according to the market? How many of you are paying $5.35 for a head of lettuce at the grocery store? There is hard to find a $5 head of lettuce at the grocery store. At the farmer's market, maybe, but not at the grocery store. And so that's just like Dr. Marshall was talking about. That's the break-even number. That's the amount that I have to charge to cover the cost of producing that product. And I'm not going to pay someone to eat the lettuce that I'm growing, right? So I have to charge that at the minimum. And then this markup, 50%, that's something to keep in mind. In addition to what Dr. Marshall told us about figuring out the market and what the market will bear, A general rule of thumb is add 50% of the cost of production to come up with a final price. And so that's what I put here, $2.67 for that more expensive one, or $1.44 for my 1,000 heads of lettuce. So coming up with my total sales price. So an $8 head of lettuce or $4.30 head of lettuce. I might be hard pressed to sell either of those, right? And so I might need to increase my efficiency somehow, or diversify my crops. If I can get $4 for that head of lettuce, then while my profit margin isn't quite as high, I'm still covering my costs and making a little bit of money. Or I really like what Dr. Marshall said about offering maybe some coupons or deals, discounts, to figure out where that sweet spot is. If people are willing to they're willing to buy something if they feel like they're getting a 50-cent discount, then keep your price higher and offer that 50-cent discount, okay? Or explain to them all the love that went into producing this beautiful head of lettuce that's crunchy and crispy, and not bitter. So when we look at variable costs and fixed costs, and we add that all up, it can help us decide, is this a product that's even marketable? Is there enough value in this product for me to sell it for a profit? Okay. Some other resources that you may find helpful. This called Veggie Compass is really kind of what I've been talking about as far as keeping track of all the costs associated. It's this really beautiful spreadsheet that can help you figure out exactly what each piece of the business, of your farm business, is bringing in and how to meet that price floor, so to speak, and figure out, is this even a viable enterprise? I should not be growing lettuce, I should be growing tomatoes, things like that. Iowa State University Extension has an ag decision maker tools for 15 different vegetables. So if one of those vegetables is something that you grow, that can also be a helpful spreadsheet to look at. I really like University of Kentucky's Center for Crop Diversification. They have so many good resources on their website. They also offer tons of webinars also. So if you have a little bit of time on your hands during this cooler part of the season, that might be a good place to find some of that information. Urban Soil Health, Brooke, I don't know if you've potentially introduced these folks to Urban Soil Health, but at the very minimum, they will come to your farm or production site and each year offer a free soil test. So there is some value. They provide technical assistance as well, but a free soil test is one of those things that I'm helping them to promote as well. And then for those of you who really like keeping records, there's more than just spreadsheets. There's lots of software options out there. There's a really excellent library of all the different softwares at this website, resilientfood.org. And you can sort through them depending on what you're specifically trying to grow. If it's livestock, pigs or goats, dairy, any type of CSA, if you're into that, you can sort through them. And there's basically a synopsis of what that resource provides, what that software can do for you, what the fees are associated with it. Not all of the software listed on that site have fees. Some of them are open source. So I do highly recommend looking at that if you're into those things.
And then Heidi, I wanted to mention, in case people aren't, not everybody is following the chat, Daniel, who is a record keeping wizard, I have seen him present on his record keeping, put a link in there for a good spreadsheet to help figure out costs for labor, which he says labor is the hardest to figure out. So there's one more resource there.
Yeah, absolutely. Good.